Good morning, everybody. Great to have you here on this session today. We're just going to give it a little bit of extra time for some additional people just to join. So just bear with us. It's great to have you on our webinar today and really excited about what we can share with you. So just give us about 30 seconds and then we'll be back into the webinar and really looking forward to sharing this information with you today. Great. Just give us a second there. Right, as I said, good morning, everyone, or good day to you, wherever you are. My name is Rogan Morrison. I'm the sales director for VOQUZ Labs here out of South Africa and Cape Town, and really fantastic to have you on board. Unfortunately, my fellow director, Tony, is not able to make it today. He's got a bit of a family emergency that he's dealing with, and so he won't be on board. But please, for those of you in the Asia Pacific region, please reach out to Tony. There is a contact email at the end of this presentation. You can drop us an email on that and we'll redirect you to the right person in that context. But let's get started. Very excited to be introducing really our visoryQ solution, which is specifically designed to help organizations understand and automate the RISE evaluation, but not only RISE, but also the contract evaluation context around S4HANA from an ECC to S4HANA perspective. So let's jump straight into it. You'll see that that's the name that we've given it, and really it is about advising people, and that's why it's called visoryQ. So the future of your SAP environment, the first challenge that most organizations have is, to determine, is SAP your core business? Of course. If that's the case and you're on ECC, you're currently being probably evaluated by SAP, and not in a bad way, but in the context of what can they propose to you. Okay, and in most cases, a lot of organizations are getting the option of getting a RISE or on-premise proposal. A lot of organizations are looking at the principles of what are they going to get out of these proposals, and one could be on-premise, where you have a bit more control over the perpetual licenses and direct access to the infrastructure and the active management services that you could be working with from different vendors and hyperscalers, etc. You are most likely going to get a RISE proposal from SAP, and I'm sure lots of organizations have already received certain RISE proposals. We've been working with organizations who've been doing so, and this is part of the reason why we've got such a big drive to help organizations with the automation of understanding the RISE proposal and what the benefit of this is in terms of a total cost of ownership model for that. And really what the RISE proposal says is really it's an all-in-one contract where SAP manages both the infrastructure and the managed services. And then thirdly, what we're seeing a lot of organizations are starting to discuss internally and with other partners such as Gartner, etc., is this composable ERP, where you have a best of breed set of product choices that meet the maximum flexibility within your organization. And this does realize a licensing challenge around indirect usage, because as soon as you start plugging in third-party applications and interacting those with your SAP core, you start looking at indirect access, etc. So these are the three main challenges that organizations are facing from a future perspective, looking at their journey with SAP from a contractual perspective. How do we make the best decisions, the best outcomes with regards to our ERP strategy from a contracting perspective? And really, what we need to understand from a challenge perspective is, if you look at your ERP strategy, we're going to go through a list of just some ideas and questions around the challenges that organizations have in this context around, should I have my own hyperscaler contract? What is my relationship with my hyperscaler? Is it a very good relationship? What am I gaining from a value perspective from my hyperscaler in my contract at this point in time? What is not included if I move into a RISE contract? What don't I get in the context of hyperscaling? What don't I get with the other contract types? What would I miss out on? So it's not only important to understand what you are getting, it's also to understand what you're not getting. And I think that's a very important aspect around the context of the integration from a RISE perspective, but also from an S/4HANA perspective, etc. What are the service levels? Am I getting a different set of service levels from a hyperscaler perspective versus what I'm getting from SAP? And what are the valuations of those different service levels? It's very important to discuss that, have an understanding of those service levels. What does it mean for you in your business if you don't get the right service level? What will I be charged for indirect usage? Okay, do I have a best of breed strategy approach? Will this lead to indirect usage charges, etc.? Is RISE cheaper or more expensive than the bring your own license scenario? How do we evaluate this? So these are the questions you should be asking yourselves. Am I going to get the right license value if I go down the RISE route, or if I bring my own license and go onto a hyperscaler in the S/4HANA on-premise type scenario structure or in a cloud, etc.? What happens, does RISE integrate with other hyperscaler solutions? So if I choose a specific hyperscaler, whether it's one of the big three hyperscalers, what happens if I want to integrate with solutions that are in another hyperscaler space? Functionality, maybe data, whatever it may be. How am I going to bridge the gap between my RISE contract and the context of that, and how am I going to integrate that to other hyperscaler solutions? What do I get for my old licenses? Do I trade these in? Do I convert them? Do I crystallize them if they're in an unlimited agreement? What do I get from them? So do I have shelfware? So these are questions that we need to ask as we go through this process. What happens if I need to go back to on-premise? Is there a road back to on-premise? If I want to move away from the cloud, can I go back there? What's the process to get there? What about data hosting? Okay, will I need to be paying more for data hosting, for data exchanges via a RISE contract to an S/4HANA with a specific hyperscaler? What are my options here? What will come out of this from a data hosting perspective and from a data charging perspective? What happens if I put on high availability? What happens to disaster recoveries? These are all questions that occur in the data context of your hosting. And what hidden costs do I need to consider? The things that you might have not considered are maybe elements around the SAP basis costs. Maybe you're under the impression that everything from a basis perspective goes away in RISE. What do I need to consider in the context of these hidden costs? What is not provided as a standard? What is provided as an optional in the context of RISE? Things like disaster recoveries, high availabilities, etc. So these potentially are hidden costs. They're not necessarily viable up front. You don't necessarily see them up front. How do I actually manage all of this information around answering all of these different questions? And that's really the challenge that we see in working with a lot of customers. So if you look at the three different layers here that we've got, it's the ECC where you may be on S/4HANA, you also may be on an S/4HANA solution, and RISE with SAP. So perpetual licenses, bring your own licenses, infrastructure services. What services will we get? What hyperscaler cloud options will we get? What are the contract terms and conditions? These are some of the complex items that you need to build together on the ECC level, on the S/4HANA subscription licenses, moving away from perpetual licenses. What about migration costs? Have we actually considered the cost of that migration and built it into our TCO model? Do we have a viable set of information and data that provides information around the savings and the ROI? What about your prices and discounts on a product line item basis? What about functionality in terms of industry solutions? Can I move across? How will my infrastructure costs change? Will I be paying a subscription for infrastructure costs? What about if I'm in a hybrid model and I've got to have two databases running at the same time because I don't necessarily can't migrate all of my functionality across? How will I manage these things? So these are very there's a lot of complexity inside of this. You know, application management services, what do I need in terms of application management services? What do I need in terms of SAP basis services? And what product selection do I need? We need to consider all of these different elements and package them in such a way that you can determine an accurate total cost of ownership model when it comes to deciding between ECC, staying on it, S4HANA, and RISE with SAP. So what does visoryQ really do? First of all, it does a comparison, and that's really what you want to understand. You want to be able to compare accurately the valuation of the contract on ECC, what you're currently paying, versus S4HANA on-premise versus RISE. It's a simple set of calculations that is needing to be made. You need to understand the detailed total cost of ownership over a period of time. And we'll show you how that works actually when we jump into the demo of the system very quickly, because that's the valuation that you need to take forward in terms of owning the context of your contract. What are the differences in the services and the SLAs? So it's important to see those differences, to be able to visualize them, and then to be able to manage according to those differences. What about the yearly spend of all solutions? We want to analyze that yearly spend. Is it going up? Is it going down? In certain organizations, you need to be able to compare OPEX and CAPEX. So some companies have a way from a financial perspective that they want to determine a certain value in the OPEX space or in the CAPEX space, and they may want to allocate financially the information to different cost centers from an OPEX and a CAPEX perspective. What is that valuation? So we are building all of this together inside of the visoryQ solution. What about automated estimates for cloud infrastructure? So this is taking the hyperscalers information from from their perspective, from a price listing perspective, and bringing that in to the total cost of ownership models. And that's really automated as well. Estimations on basis administration. Okay, and I did forget to say, please, there is a chat box. I jumped into it a bit earlier. There's a question box. I'm sure there's going to be some questions. I see one just popped in there now. I will definitely get you some questions. Maybe we'll take a break just before we go into the demo of the solution itself. I've got some slides on that, and we can answer some questions on that. But one very important to understand, as I said, is the basis administration, obtaining the estimates for what you would need to retain from a basis administration perspective and what the costs of those are. So we do have that from a data point perspective that we will bring into the tool into the visoryQ. And then you need to understand the outcome of this. Really, the whole point of this is to get an understanding of the advantages and the disadvantages of every option. So what is to your advantage and what's going to benefit you in the context of your discussions, your negotiations with SAP? What's to your advantage and what's to your disadvantage? Where do you have levers of negotiation that will improve the contract that you're going to be taking up? Okay, and very importantly, before you start a negotiation in any form from a vendor perspective, it's really important to have all the necessary data points. The relevant information must be at hand from which to negotiate. If you're missing data points, then it's very difficult. You leave yourself with a lack of leverage, and it's very much more important to have that in place from a negotiation perspective. So the outcomes of the process that we run through in visoryQ is to, as I said, to compare, to do all the analysis in an automated way that you come out understanding your advantages, your disadvantages, and obtaining all the necessary data to do the negotiation from. So how does visoryQ automate the decision-making process? Okay, so if you had to say, where do we start? Okay, what is the starting point to get going with this? So the most important things in terms of the data elements that we would need to plug into the visoryQ tool is the bill of materials, if you have the SAP contracts, and if you have your infrastructure sizing. Those are the three key elements that we need to have, and we plug this in, and then the automation process starts from that. So that's the basic set of data items or data points that we need to do, and for most organizations you have that information at hand, and that's really simple. It's a simple process. If you've got those three things, we can start and kick this off here. And really what it does is it in a very clear methodical way, the visoryQ builds the business case based on the various different possible variations of ECC, S/4HANA, and RISE. And that's the principle of this. So you don't have to go out and do long, complex RFP processes. You can grab this information. It's really quick and easy, and you can build the right scenarios very quickly and easily. So I think I've covered some of these other points already: hyperscaler costs, RISE comparables, AMS costs, different environments, HANA service administration costs and basis, etc. So those already been covered in the context. So how do we do this approach? What is the methodology of this approach? You'll see here, as we said, enter the bill of materials. Okay, if you have a RISE proposal, we can take that data as well. And if you have optimized your ECC environment using our SAMQ tool, we take that data as well in. So there is a way that we can do this with different options available to you. So if you just wanted to do a very simple view, we could take just the bill of materials, but it's always better to get other context, and the more data points you have, the richer the outcome is. Okay, we obtain the estimates of the cost for infrastructure. We obtain the estimated cost from the basis services that you require out of the visoryQ, and then we understand the costs and services of the scope that you need. This all comes out of visoryQ, these items in the blue blocks, and that gives you a outcome, as I said already, to determine the best negotiation strategy and the best possible contract from that perspective. So this is the process. It's a very, we've simplified the process. We said, what do customers really need to provide for us in a very simple set of context in order to get this outcome? And that's really the principles of what we've built in terms of visoryQ. Okay, so what is it? It is a fact-based analysis from a total cost of ownership, including the services, the SLAs for ECC, S/4HANA on-premise, and RISE with SAP. It really is fact-based, and that's the whole objectivity of this process. It's an independent view of your different options when you go to contracting from an SAP perspective. Okay, so before we jump into the actual business case builder in terms of visoryQ, let me just stop there for a second. I just want to check what questions we may have in the questions panel. Yes, of course, this session is recorded, and we will send out some of the context after this. Can the tool evaluate possible moves from a public cloud to either on-prem or to a hyperscaler? Absolutely. Yes, we can move and do variations. So it's not just tailored for RISE. Of course, the main driver at the moment in the marketplace is RISE, but most certainly we can, the tool has the functionality and the flexibility to take other scenarios in. So we have a multiple scenario approach. So if you come to us and say to us, this is the scenario I have, I would like to be able to see this, then certainly we can do that. Okay, please, again, fantastic to see questions coming in, and it's always good to have some interaction from yourselves, the audience. I feel like otherwise I'm monotoning here, and it's great to be able to answer some of your questions. Right, let's jump back into the presentation context here as well. So really, what do we cover from a visoryQ perspective? You'll see on the left-hand side here that we have the analysis of all the financial scenarios. Okay, so you'll see at the top left-hand side here within the tooling structure, we have the composition, a review of all the components, the spend items, the total cost of ownership, the OPEX and CAPEX, and the return on investment. So the financial elements are covered in the top section here. We have the business case components underneath that. So these are the different scenarios, and the scenarios can be ECC, it can be public cloud, it can be RISE for SAP, it can be S/4HANA on-premise. We can have multiple different scenarios in this context, and that's what's really important. RISE is but one scenario, and it's very important to understand that if you want, and we're not saying that RISE is not the right way to go, but if you want to go down that option, it is very important that you look at all the different options available to you. We can't stress that enough, and you'll see why when we look at this from a demo perspective, okay? Then we also look at the services. As we said earlier, what's important to understand is what application management services are required, basis other application management services, what negotiation checklists are available, and any open items that we need to cover. So we have space to do that. And then we also look at a very detailed analysis of the contracts, the bill of materials, and the categories. So in the tooling structure, this comes up front, but in terms of the process, of course, it's pretty much built from the bottom up. So when we build it, as I showed you in the past there, we would be looking at the contracts, the bill of materials, the relevant product categories. This information, together with the scoping and the contracting, together with the scenarios and the business case components, gives us the financial information evaluation. So in this context of the presentation, please note that I'm going to be building it from the bottom up. Okay, I'm not going to be jumping in it from at the top down, and we're building it from the bottom up, and that's really the importance of it. Okay, so you'll see on the right-hand side here, we've got the application overview, some details in terms of the total cost of ownership, software costs, infrastructure costs, service levels and governance basis, contract terms and conditions. So this is what we really are covering in terms of the detailed scope. And then we have the data requirements. So what minimal data is required, as you've seen there. ECC bill of materials. If you have the basis costs, we can provide those already automated in the tool. We've also got RISE proposal. You may have received a RISE proposal, you may not have. If you have, we can build it in. You might have your infrastructure costs. We've already got certain valuations from the hyperscalers in terms of the infrastructure costs that we compare, and the migration costs as well. So I know it may be a little bit small. We're going to jump into that in a little bit more detail as we get in there. Okay, and I see some more questions flowing in. Let me handle those maybe a little bit later as we go through the process itself. Okay. Okay, let's jump into the demo itself. So as I said, let me not go too fast. As I say, this is where we want to build your ERP strategy on a transparent and documented foundation. So you want it to be fact-based. You need to consider all the various different composable potential values and elements inside from an architectural perspective. And this is really to measure and to create for you a strategic approach on your contracting structure. So you can see it in detail here, and you'll see the various elements underneath here as well. So the first thing that we want to look at is, as I said, from a building perspective, we need to understand the contract nature. What do you have in place? Okay, what are all your current licenses? It's really important. We've got the contract details, your bill of materials, the product categories, and we can document all that. So what contracts have I closed with SAP, and what is the bill of material results from them? Pretty much simple set of questions and answers that we're going to get out of this approach. Okay, the product categories. Which products drive the cost of my SAP contracts? It's really important to understand the detail of this. If you look at this as an example, you'll see here that, for example, business objects is consuming a 23% valuation of my entire product categories. Okay, so when I start negotiations and I'm going to move to a cloud type set of products, am I going to move away from business objects towards software analytics cloud? Am I going to move to another cloud solution? What are my options from a product category perspective? As I said, I'm building this from the bottom up. I need to have all the relevant data pieces in place from a bill of materials perspective, and this is what we need from yourselves. So we can build this content out. You'll see on the left here the list of the product categories, the product descriptions, the metrics, etc., the OPEX and the maintenance base. And this gives you a very good view of what are the relevant products that I need to think about that are giving me the highest cost evaluation from an OPEX perspective. Okay. Then I start composing the financial scenarios. So in the context of this, once I've got this information as well as the other pieces, I start looking at the financial scenarios that I need to build. So I need to understand which scenarios do we really need to run. Okay, are we doing a comparison to RISE, or are we just looking at moving from ECC to S4HANA, or as some of the other people put in there, could I move off public cloud and move to S4HANA on-premise? What happens if I'm in a partner managed cloud environment? Would I think of moving to S4HANA on-premise rather than maybe moving to RISE? Or would I like to go to RISE versus that? So multiple different scenarios is what we need to understand from yourselves as well. So we have different ones here. You'll see them underneath here. And also you might want to also do comparisons, as I say, with a local provider versus with a hyperscaler as well, or with different hyperscalers. Okay, so, and with different migration paths. So that's also important to understand. So the scenarios are not limited to one set of data points, if I can put it that way. There are multiple different elements that fulfill to the different scenario types. We're going to look at a few of those as an example in terms of what the solution can do, but please be aware that we're not limited. This is an example set, it's some demo data, and here you can see that in this context we have the financial scenarios, the infrastructure scenarios, the components assigned to each scenario. So you will see here that we've got software from RISE, infrastructure from RISE, savings, services on terms of basis, etc. All of these are factors that you need to consider in terms of the scenarios. Okay, and the data structure of those scenarios is indicated on the right-hand side here. So very important here, the business case components. This is where we sit down and we really break it down. So it's like a decomposition. We decompose the relevant scenarios and we recompose them, similar to a V model in the enterprise architecture space. Okay, if we look at the RISE scenario as an example, so the question that we often get asked is, what is not included with RISE with SAP that I have today? Okay, what services do I have to include to make the offering comparable with my actual ECC environment? This is probably one of the most important questions to ask around the RISE context. So what is not included? Okay, often we think of everything that is included, but we don't ask the reverse question. So in essence, almost I would say the fill up. What do I need to do in order to fill it up so that I get the same levels of services, etc., that I'm having currently today? And here you can see an example. So we have, you can go and these are filters, you can select the multiple components that you want to, and here we add in the relevant product details in terms of what specific information do you require. So in other words, especially a question around basis, how many basis services do we need to manage? Physical servers, applications, databases, etc. What service levels do I need to have in place from a basis perspective? Okay, and where will I get those basis services? Am I going to keep them in-house? Am I going to do an application management service on that? What are the relevant services we're going to get from here? And here we get an outcome in terms of the scenario of the total cost of spend per year with all the relevant price components and the product groups in a scenario. So the services element, the infrastructure element, and the software element. And this is starting to create a comparative model that you can then actually view. Okay, it's very easy. You can start seeing this. You can see all the relevant information from an OpEx perspective of the price components in here as well. Okay, now we can compare this to your ECC. So this is maybe the scenario where you've already got a RISE proposal from SAP and you want to say, hey, but what does it look like in comparison to my actual current costs? Okay, what happens to my costs after I do a contract or product conversion? And what is the difference in RISE with SAP? Okay, so just remember, if you look at that little blue circle on the bottom right, you can see the difference. Services, infrastructure, software. This is demonstration data, so it may not be as accurate, but this is the important thing to look at. You can see that maybe that has changed. The software valuation may be 51%, infrastructure was 32%, and services 17%. It may change. Okay, so here we have the RISE with SAP scenario. And sorry, let me just take that out. Sorry, there's a little blip in my slide there. Let's just delete that little blip there, and let's go back up here quickly. Okay, so we have the scenario in ECC here, and here you can again see all the different scenario components. We can see the different selections that you have here, and the total cost of spend per year is 588,000 as an example. So again, important to understand what you have in terms of your components and the comparison that we're going to do with RISE. And then scenario 3, we may do an S/4HANA on-premise with a local provider. This may be one of the hyperscalers, it may be a local data provider with a migration scenario from a specific type of migration. Maybe it's a greenfields, a brownfields, a bluefields approach, whichever migration approach you may decide to select on, okay? And the costing of that. So do I know the costs in essence for the perpetual and a hyperscaler? How much application management services and basis services are included in those? We start capturing that information. So here we build in as well the migration costs. They're also in RISE for HANA, RISE for SAP as well. And so here you can actually get to see the variations. And again, the little blue circle underneath here gives you a good indication of the percentage split between the services, the infrastructure, and the software. Okay. And then we start doing some additional on top of this, the additional financial evaluations. As I said earlier, OPEX and CAPEX. Lots of organizations want to see the split between the OPEX line items and the CAPEX line items. What is it going to cost me from a RISE perspective, from an ECC perspective, from an S4HANA perspective on premise? What is those valuations? And this graphic and this dashboard, very easy from a tooling perspective, very easy represents that. So you can see on the left-hand side here, the RISE, the ECC, the S4HANA, with the migration 1, with migration 2. From a CAPEX perspective, a one-time payment, you can see the differences here. So ECC may be low at this point in time versus HANA on hyperscaler 1 with the migration approach of this versus a local provider, etc. So again, making active comparisons is really important. And now we're starting to bring this in. And does this approach push you towards perpetual licenses versus subscription licenses? Which is the right license category structure that you should be purchasing? Okay, based on the facts from a costing perspective. Okay. We also look at the savings and the return on investment. Okay, so in this context, a very detailed set of information is now plugged in here, and we start looking at what are the savings amounts. So these savings amounts can come through from a return on shelfware and a costing evaluation that we've done in terms of the improvements. So here you can see the savings, okay, and these savings are then applied to these values over here. So that's why they look a little bit different. So it's not that that these numbers are incorrect. It's just that if you apply the savings from these columns here, it automatically updates that. And you can see the total cost of ownership over a 5-year period, including the savings and without the savings. So bringing the savings in, what does that do to my total cost of ownership? And can I justify my strategy based on the return on investment that I'm actually going to be gaining or losing? So how will the return on investment drive the decision in a specific direction? Okay, important to understand that. And then we look at different service catalogs. So what about backup services, disaster and recovery? Is it included? Is it not included? What is included in RISE? What is my requirements? Okay, so if I compare a RISE service category catalog with what I have today, do I get it? Do I not get it? What would I have to pay if I still want to maintain that? Okay, what happens if I bring in a hyperscaler? Do they include it? Do they not include it? So this is very important to understand whether it's included in my proposal or not included in my proposal, and what am I expecting from a service level agreement in order to get a like for like as close as possible to what I have today. And then most importantly, this is probably the most valuable slide at the end almost here, is this comparison from a financial evaluation. The spend per year at an accumulated rate. So what am I spending over time for the next 5 to 10 years, and which makes the most sense? So taking all those different elements, considering them in terms of the total cost of ownership on a yearly payment structure, and here we can see this graphically represented. So what's the different spend per year? What am I going to come out with over the next 10 years? So, and this is really what you want to get to in order to make a clear and accurate decision. So plugging the data into the tool gives you this valuation, and that's really what you want to see. It's simplifying this in such a way that it makes it easy to understand from a financial perspective in terms of the total cost of ownership. Okay, we also have some things, once you've done that and you decide, okay, great, I know which direction I want to go in, this is the process I want to go through. Now we also provide you with some negotiation checklists. Okay, so having had a lot of experience in working with customers who are negotiating with SAP, we can then bring in specific negotiation checklists that help you to improve your negotiations. So what are the best practices on SAP from a contracting perspective? And we've been doing this for, as you can see, for well over 10 years. And so we have very good understanding of what are the best terms and conditions and how you should apply those terms and conditions to the context of your negotiation with SAP. So it's a combination of not only finding the right financial information, but also being provided with a set of detailed information that will help you negotiate better. And that's very important to come out with a better vendor relationship. Okay, there is a hand up and maybe it's gone down again. If there is some questions, please pop them in the question box, and then we'll take it from here. We do have some time for questions. And I can also jump back to certain other slides if you want me to. So I'll just stop it there and just answer some questions. If there's a specific slide you want me to go back to, please pop it in the question box and I can go back to it. We have got a bit of time. I'll just stop there for a second and open some questions. Okay, yes, the slides are pretty detailed. This is really, this is the outcome of the actual tool. So it's really important to understand how the tool works. In context, you have to put a lot of data in, okay? But we then do a summarization of this data when we look at it from a tooling perspective. So definitely important for that. Can we compare different regulatory requirements as part of this? I'm sure we can. It is important for us to do that. So definitely, maybe what I can do is I can reach out to you afterwards and get those different regulatory requirements, and we can see how we need and what we need to build in as part of that. Definitely, we're very open to that. It's maybe something that is not at the moment built in, but certainly we can do that, and we can actually add those in as an additional context to this. Just remember that, as you said here, in different organizations, there will be different, and different regions, there'll be different, maybe regulatory compliance requirements for this. So most certainly we can. I'm very open to that. It's a very good suggestion, and thank you for making that to us. We can certainly do that. Alrighty, yeah, look, you will get the slides afterwards. If you want to have a detailed view of this, in very, and I can dive much deeper into this, please reach out to us. There's an email address afterwards. I'm happy to have a secondary session with individuals after this as well. Okay, quick question around, is it necessary to move to RISE in order to have the FUE-based license model? Can we have it outside of RISE? As far as I understand, the FUE-based model is only within the RISE context. So I don't see SAP at this point in time offering FUE outside of RISE. If that changes, we will let you know, but I don't see it on that. Yes, we will touch base in terms of the pricing for the visoryQ. Please reach out to us directly. There's going to be an email address as well after this. We've tried to keep it as you can see, as simple and as easy to use. So definitely in that. What is the typical length and effort of such an exercise? It depends on the volume of things like the bill of materials, but I would say anywhere between 1 and 2 months. It's not a huge exercise. So it's a very quick exercise. Once we've got the data, as I said, from the bill of materials, if you already have a RISE proposal, we can plug this in pretty quickly and start getting this information out to you. So a pretty quick process in terms of a service offering. Yeah, Michael, I think I answered some of that question around the information around how do we charge customers. Definitely we'll discuss that, and we'll have some pricing available to yourselves. Reach out to me on that. Let me just go down through a few more questions. It's great to have questions in here. So in this context here, one of the things that we have to be cognizant of is we don't bring in data from customers in this context. We're using information directly from various sources, but not from customers' data. So we need to collect the bill of material from the customer, of course, because that's unique to them. But other customers and sharing that across other customers, no, we don't. There's specific, governance in that context and that. Is there a trend in terms of the license which is more advantageous? It's difficult to say at this point in time because RISE is pretty new in the market space. So what we do see though is that in some cases, it is very much a case by case. I don't want to say RISE is better or worse. For some companies, RISE is the right way to go. It really much depends on where you are in your journey with SAP, certain types of functionality that you may have implemented that may not be available in S/4HANA at this point in time. Each company is unique in this context, so we normally take it on a case-by-case basis. So at the moment, if I had to say, is it advantageous to go to RISE? In some cases, it's not. In some cases, it is. Those cases are variable from customer to customer, and from region to region as well. So there's not one true answer to this, unfortunately, because of various different factors that have to be applied. And I know it doesn't maybe give you a totally true answer, but this is the current view that we have at this point in time. I think if we look back maybe in 2 years' time, then, and we have 2 years of additional data that has been processed, then definitely we can do some extrapolations and say this was better or that wasn't. But we're not there at this point in time. Definitely we'll send out costing and things like that. Please reach out for us from a tooling perspective regarding costs. Let me know. Is the tool able to manage currency fluctuations and multi-currencies? We can build that into the tool. There are ways to do that. So yes, we can add multi-currencies and fluctuations into that. So just let us know which type of currencies you may have and the fluctuations. Of course, if you have very high degrees of fluctuations, I think of our own currency here, definitely we can. Yes, what about other types of interactions with SAP? So BTP, Cloud Connector, integration suites, those will definitely be part of the product set. So when you look at the product set, and maybe I can go back one slide, but when you talk about what products would be included in that, yes, most certainly. We have to look at the length and the breadth of the product set that you may be wanting to consume from SAP and build that into the total cost of ownership model. Okay, yes, we do. There's a question around, do we help with suggested specific terms to be included in the contract? Absolutely. So one of the biggest things that we've learned is what are the best, and we said it in the negotiation there, what are the best terms and conditions and usage rights that you should have in your specific circumstances in terms of your negotiation with SAP. Okay. Historical data migration, no, we don't do data migration projects. We're not really into that area, but I can certainly put you in touch with relevant individuals who are specialists in historical data migration projects, etc. There's another question about, is HIC customers, is it better to go for RISE? It depends. This is the whole purpose of this tooling. The tooling is there to give you a very determined, accurate evaluation of which is the best option for you from a costing perspective. So that's really what we're trying to do from a tooling perspective, is give customers the right information from which to gain the right decisions from a contractor perspective. And we want to automate that, and we've automated it as far as possible at this point in time. I'm sure there's enrichment that we can do as the tool grows, but this is where we are at this point in time. So in summary, I just want to summarize, and I'm sure there'll be more questions. I'm very open to answer more questions. So in summary, okay, we have a proven methodology. We've done this in other customers, but we didn't do it from a tooling perspective. We use different mechanisms to do it. So we've done this many times for other organizations, and we recognize that most organizations want a faster, quicker, automated approach to get to the relevant outcomes. And that's really what we do. Take the total cost of ownership models, include all the relevant components, compare the financials of service scope, infrastructure, etc. We've proved this in more than over 50 projects with lots of different customers. Now we can automate this from a tooling perspective. We're including costing indications from RISE comparable infrastructure from the main hyperscalers. So that's really important. You don't have to go out and get that information. We've already got that information provided for in the tool itself. We have already got cost indications for application management support and basis administration for different countries in different regions, etc. So that's also important. You don't have to go and look for that information. It's automatically pushed through into the tool from an automated approach, and you automatically get to the terms and condition recommendations for your contract. So I think I've answered that question as well. So these are automated pieces of information that pull into the tool and provide you with this completeness of vision. So it covers all of these different elements when you're looking at a total cost of ownership model from a contracting perspective, that you can do an accurate comparison. And really, the value is, I say to a lot of customers, if you don't plan for value, you will not obtain value. You can't just get value. You have to plan for it. So it's really important that the process of doing this is a planning for value, and then you actually obtain the value, you actually execute, and you actually receive the value. Okay. And what's important that comes out of this, I just want to highlight that it's not, I haven't put in a slideshow, but in a slide deck. But what's important about this is, and the interaction that we've seen with lots of customers interacting with vendors, is that for many years they have a sense of disappointment around the vendor contract. They don't think that they really got what they wanted to get. And what we want to get for yourselves, and what you should also be aiming to do, is have a very much improved vendor relationship. Okay, that is important. It's very important to have good vendor relationships. Okay, and we're trying to encourage that process as well by giving you, from an automated approach, a very structured, good set of information from which to make decisions on, which will improve your vendor relationship. Okay, and that's really important. Okay, let me jump to some more questions, because we are at the end. I don't know if there's any specific slides you want us to go back to, but let me jump to a few more here. Okay. All right, so having finished one RISE on private cloud basis out, how much automation is in this area? Well, let me say this, from a tooling perspective, the visoryQ tool provides you costing indication of what value of basis services you should require in order to do a migration. And I think that's the important part that we're trying to get through in terms of this context that we're providing to customers. Is it's not necessarily the challenges of migrating and the context of basis in that migration. That's very much a service orientated discussion, and we can have that discussion, but this is really around financially understanding the basis component of this and what it would cost to do the migration process and to maintain the current set of services that you are getting from a RISE contract or from an S/4HANA contract on premise, etc. Okay. There's another question here. What is the commercial model of engagement with an SAP vendor? An ex-incumbent vendor advising enterprise using SAP. I'm not sure I understand if that's a question or just a comment, but the commercial model of engagement with an SAP vendor in terms of if they're a value-added reseller or partner, of course, this is interacting with SAP. It requires a commercial engagement. You can't do anything with SAP software unless you have the licenses to do that. And within the context of SAP licensing, it's extremely complicated. As I showed much earlier, this is not a simple, as we say, a simple walk in the park. There are many factors to consider from a complexity perspective when you look at your interaction with SAP. So when you're interacting from a vendor perspective, one of the biggest challenges that we see is because there's so much complexity, the procurement team doesn't understand the technical complexity of the licensing challenge. The technical team understands that, but is not necessarily able to translate that into a financial language that the procurement team can go to SAP and have a good vendor interaction from a contracting perspective. And that's what we're also trying to solve from a tooling perspective here. And that's really what visoryQ does. It takes a lot of the technical licensing challenges and the real detail inside of those technical challenges, understanding the volume of user licenses actually required to move from ECC to S/4HANA. What will that transition be? How many users do you really need? Okay, these are very technically orientated questions that you need to be able to answer. A procurement person sitting in the procurement office cannot answer that question. They don't have the technical knowledge to do that. And so it's very important to be able to combine the technical detail of what goes on in the technical elements of licensing, engines, products, infrastructure, services, basis, etc., and be able to provide that in the financial context to people who are making financial decisions and being able to do that. Okay, so that's That's really the context of this, and how do we bridge that gap so that your procurement, your financial teams have the best set of information from which to make viable, informative decisions around the best contract model to go forward with an SAP. That's really what we have. We have another question there. Please drop me an email on that one. We certainly can be in touch with you from that side of things. You'll see that in the next slide there is an email address on that context. Okay, that's a really good question. At what stage does visoryQ come into the process? So normally for most organizations, they're in a journey with SAP where somewhere between now and 2027, they need to make a decision to move to S4HANA. And that decision is whether we stay go to an S4HANA on-premise model or a RISE model, etc. Or we stay on ECC and we extend it for a little bit longer until 2030. And then we decide what we're going to do from there on. Normally, visoryQ comes in at the approach where you either have to do a renewal, or SAP are putting on your table they're putting on the RISE proposal on your table and saying, hey, we want you to move to RISE. So in the place where you need to either renew your licensing contract with SAP, definitely upfront as early as possible, start engaging with us, start planning this. Please don't leave it till the last minute and then say, oh, we've got 1 week left before we need to negotiate a new contract with SAP. That's not the right timing. So please give it a month or two before your new contract negotiation needs to take place. Get in touch with us. If you're deciding to make changes in your organization, you say, okay, we know that the 2027 window is coming up. We're on a perpetual license at the moment. We want to move into the cloud license and we want to start a negotiation with SAP. Then decide that roadmap for yourself strategically and then come and engage us and say, listen, as part of our process of engaging from this perspective, we want to get this data out. Okay, and then at that point, we're going to be ready to negotiate with SAP. Okay, so different areas where you can interact in this. Ideal time frame, 1 to 3 months. Give yourself enough time. It depends on the size of the organization, the gross value of the bill of materials, how many contracts you have, the complexity of your landscape in terms of SAP. There are multiple factors, but if I had to give you an example of time frame, please give us 1 to 3 months. It just takes enough time to gather and to make sure that we cover all the elements. We need to look through the contract information that you have. There may be unique elements in your contract that you currently have, and we need to understand how would we take those unique elements forward. What's the best mechanism going forward on this? Okay. Do we also consider limitations in comparison to the current HANA EE licenses? Yes, we can. So absolutely. One of the things that we look at is what will you not get in terms of licenses. So we can definitely take that valuation into the context as well. As I say, for every customer that we've been to, and I've been to quite a number, there is a unique set of terms and conditions, user rights, contract structures that they have in place, ways in which they've contracted with SAP. So there's almost not one that we've come across that doesn't have a little small piece of uniqueness, and we have to take that context into play when we bring this to bear and we bring the outputs out for you. That's really important. Okay. So I think we've covered quite a lot of questions. I've only got a few minutes left. Please, if there are other questions, let me jump, and I'm going to just close the question bar here now quickly. So thank you again for your questions. We're really excited about this. I just want to say it's something that I think is so valuable in the marketplace to be able to provide a valuable set of data, and not just data elements, not just data points, but really to transform that data into an information set that really helps customers. You can see our email address there. The reason for that is because there are different regions, so send us this and we'll get the right person in the right region to be in touch with you. It's important that we send it to the right people, and we are going to have another licensing webinar, probably LinkedIn Live. Look out for it on our license dashboards. We've got a specific set of brilliant license dashboards that you can use on an ongoing basis. So when you finish this process, okay, and you say, great, I've now got the right contract with SAP. Now, how do I maintain it? And this is where the license dashboards come in. So this is something that then sets you on the right trajectory to maintain your compliance, maintain an optimized set of licensing in your landscape, and to adjust it as your business changes in the context of SAP, okay, and with other vendors. So it's very important that you're never static in one point in time in your journey with SAP. So that's something to look out for. We will definitely send out notifications on that, and please have a look for that. It's also a fantastic session. You'll get to see really relevant information around licensing and the context of the licensing in there. Okay. Let's just have a look there quickly. Another question that's come in here. Are there differences in negotiation strategy and pricing depending on where the contract will be? Absolutely. Okay. We've seen that there's significant differences in pricing across different regions from SAP. And that is something to be aware of. Also different pricing in terms of currencies. So there was a question about earlier about currencies and things like that. Absolutely, these definitely play a role in terms of the contracting, where the contracting is taking place, and things like that. Yeah, have a look on the VOQUZ Labs. I hope that answered your question there. I trust it does. Otherwise, I can always get back to you. Drop us an email there, and we can discuss the last question around negotiation strategy and pricing, dependent on where you contract. We can give you some examples there and what we see in the market space. That's also important for you to understand. Could we add the licensing model link? Yes, we will do. We'll send that out. So if you are on LinkedIn, have a check there. We will be sending up an update after this in terms of our licensing dashboard, and also on our webpage, we will have a link to our visoryQ solution and all the relevant information on that. That'll be coming shortly, but we wanted to get this out into the marketplace. We know that customers are going into the final quarter. Well, we're in quarter 4 already, and a lot of customers are thinking, what should I do before the 1st of January? There's been a maintenance increase. Should I start negotiating a new contract with SAP? How will I manage this? And that's really some of the context that we get asked a lot of the time. What's the best approach in terms of what we should be doing from a vendor interaction with SAP? Okay, we have 4 minutes left. I will leave it open for questions. And if there are any other questions, please reach out to us on the chat, or reach out to us directly on the email there. And I hope this was really informative. I'd like to say thank you very much for your time. As we said, the slides and the webinar recording will be made available. And you can, if you don't get it, just check in with myself or that. And I wish you a fantastic rest of the day, everyone. And good to have you had you on the call today. Thank you so much.